Hello everyone, and welcome back to Royalty Now, where we bring you face to face with figures from the past and talk about their history. Katherine Parr is often hailed as the wife of King Henry VIII who survived, the old one, or the nursemaid. But in reality, she was so much more than that. Katherine was a champion of religious reform, a fierce defender of her stepchildren, and a celebrated author. Her life as Queen of England and even after Henry's death is so interesting, and it even includes a brush with death. First, we'll talk about her life. We'll analyze her portraits and talk about what she looked like, and then we'll reveal our recreations of her appearance at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Katherine Parr was born sometime in 1512 to her father, Sir Thomas Parr, and her mother, Maud Green. Her father was a companion of King Henry VIII in his younger days, and her mother was a close friend and lady-in-waiting of Queen Catherine of Aragon. Although their family seat of Kendal Castle was in the north of England, Catherine was raised in or around London during her childhood, spending most of her time with her younger siblings, William and Anne, whom she loved dearly and stayed close with her entire life. When Catherine was just 5 years old, her father sadly died, leaving her mother a widow at just 28 years old. But it was in her husband's death that Maud found her strength. Unusually, she decided never to remarry and instead managed 2 of her own estates. You'll find this common thread in Catherine's life. She was always surrounded by strong women, who no doubt inspired the young Catherine to be just like them. One anecdote from her early life is really charming, even if we're not sure of how factual it is. It was said that Catherine visited a fortune teller who told her that she was destined for greater things. This prophecy led Catherine to stop wanting to learn the typical things a girl of her age would, like sewing. Instead, she said her hands were meant for scepters. Like nearly every English child for the last 1,500 years, Catherine and her siblings were raised Catholic. But unlike most children, they received strong educations, learning reading, writing, languages, and, much to Catherine's annoyance, domestic skills. At the age of 17, Catherine was betrothed. The match was made by her mother Maud, with great consideration. Catherine would be married to Edward Burrough in 1529, and on her 2-week journey north to Lincolnshire, she had no idea that she was headed towards a deeply dysfunctional new family. Life with the Burroughs was difficult. Her new husband, Edward, was frail and suffered from ill health, and her new father-in-law, Sir Thomas, was overbearing, violent, and tyrannical. Sir Thomas was also outspoken on matters of religious reform. The household as a whole was pro-Protestant and pro-Anne Boleyn, which was very difficult for Catherine because of her mother's close friendship with Catherine of Aragon. This would sadly begin the worst period in Catherine's life. When she was just 19, her mother Maud passed away, leaving her devastated and lonelier than ever. Not even 20 years old, it seemed to Catherine that she was now forever stuck with a life she hated, a familiar fate for women of her time. But only 3 years after their marriage, her husband Edward suddenly died. Left with nothing, she would leave Edward's estate and his abusive father almost immediately, and was lucky enough to find a place to stay with one of her cousins in the north of England. Her first marriage had been a horrible experience and a hard lesson to learn, but it would change Catherine for the better. Although she knew she would have to remarry eventually, she would never again let herself be put into the helpless position she was in now. Catherine would take 6 months to consider all of her options before finally remarrying in the summer of 1534. Her next husband, John Neville Lord Latimer, was a 40-year-old twice-widowed northerner whose family was some of the oldest and most powerful nobility in England. And although it wasn't what you would consider a love match, it came with an impressive title, and more importantly, Lord Latimer was a good man. In the spring of 1534, Catherine would move in with Lord Latimer and his children at Snape Castle, and her new home was a bit of a culture shock. Catherine had been raised near London as an educated woman of society. She was energetic, vivacious, smart, and she loved to dance and have a good time. But the area around Snape Castle was nothing like London, and was even considered to be wild country. Yet even though her entire lifestyle had been changed, Catherine's biggest complaint about her new life was actually Lord Latimer's teenage son. She said he was always grumpy and never stopped complaining. Although she would eventually come to have a fond relationship with her new family, especially her new stepdaughter Margaret, we aren't sure how happy Catherine was in the north. And her life in Yorkshire probably seemed quite provincial to what she was used to. There was also unrest brewing in this area. When Henry VIII had divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, in 1533, he became the head of a new Church of England, breaking with Rome. The north of England was traditionally conservative and still mostly Catholic, and this caused a deep resentment towards the crown, which soon turned violent. By 1536, a large group of rebels had gathered, and they were making threats against the lords who refused to join them. Catherine's current husband, Lord Latimer, was conservative, but still wasn't sure if he wanted to join these Catholic rebels. This put the entire family in danger. Within 2 weeks, the rebels had arrived at Katherine Parr's door. Lord Latimer wasn't home. He was on his way back from London, and he was seized on the road by the rioting men. This left Catherine and her 2 stepchildren alone to watch in horror as their home was ransacked and their lives threatened. Under duress, Lord Latimer agreed to join the Pilgrims and secured his family's safety. The revolt would gather enough support to assemble an army of 30,000 men, which forced King Henry to negotiate for peace. He would agree to all of their terms, but only if they agreed to disperse immediately and return back home. After they were gone, Henry went back on his promises and had all the rebel leaders arrested and executed, along with several hundred followers. Catherine's husband, Lord Latimer, narrowly escaped execution by claiming to be a prisoner to the cause, only joining to save his family. After the rebellion was put down, the family moved to the Blackfriars region of London in 1542, the same neighborhood that Catherine had called home as a child. Catherine felt invigorated by London, which was a bustling merchant city during the time of King Henry VIII. The king's daughter, the Lady Mary, was her good friend, and Catherine visited her often. The next 6 years of Catherine's life were some of the happiest she ever had. She was in the cultural center of England, she had friends to talk about her religious and philosophical ideas with, and she was thriving. But her life was about to change forever. Catherine's husband, Lord Latimer, died unexpectedly in 1543, leaving her a widow for the second time. The Lady Mary offered Catherine a position in her household, and Catherine gratefully accepted. So far in her life, Catherine had made sensible, serious decisions. Whether it was the boredom of 2 lackluster marriages, or maybe all that time spent in the north, Catherine had the sudden desire to flirt and have fun. She soon found herself enamored by the brother of the late Queen Jane, Sir Thomas Seymour. He was an interesting choice for Catherine. He was generally considered very handsome and charming, but rather shallow and uninterested in anything academic. But this is perhaps what drew Catherine to him, what made him such an exciting prospect. To her delight, Thomas Seymour returned her feelings, and Catherine was hopeful that she might finally get what she truly wanted, a love match, and maybe one day children of her own. But this vision of a happy future was quickly snatched away. The king, once again unmarried after the execution of his 5th wife, Catherine Howard, had noticed the lively, gray-eyed beauty of Katherine Parr. He began sending her gifts, and Catherine knew what he intended. Catherine was hoping that Henry would just take her as a mistress. Better to be a mistress than a wife, she remarked. But her fate was already sealed. The court found her to be an interesting choice for the king's next wife. Catherine was not very wealthy and also appeared to be infertile, since at the age of 30, neither of her previous marriages had resulted in children. However, she was seen as a stable and mature bride for an increasingly troubled king. On July 12, 1543, Henry and Catherine married at Hampton Court Palace. Catherine had gone from being a country widow to the Queen of England in just 4 months. While Henry seemed to believe that he was marrying for love, Catherine was not as keen. In fact, she was probably terrified. Looking back over Henry's marriages, one had ended with a brutal divorce, 2 had ended in beheadings, one from death in childbirth, and the other from rejection. How would Catherine fare in this doomed lineup of queens? And on a personal note, Henry was no longer the handsome prince of his youth. He was a middle-aged, obese king who suffered from an oozing, smelly leg ulcer that never fully healed. But as a consolation prize, she was now the Queen of England, and immensely wealthy. She immediately ordered luxurious dresses and 43 pairs of shoes. She was gifted the Queen's jewels, beautiful apartments, and luxurious furs. Catherine's first 18 months as queen were a resounding success. She was praised for both her beauty and her intelligence. A Spanish visitor said, "The queen has a lively and pleasing appearance and is praised as a virtuous woman." During this time, Catherine's interest in religious reform was flourishing. She began translating religious texts and writing her own prayers. And in 1545, she published her own book, Prayers or Meditations, becoming the first woman to publish an original work under her own name in English history. Among Catherine's other joys as queen were her relationships with her stepchildren, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Of course, it's odd to call Mary her stepchild, even though it's technically true. The 2 women were close in age and already good friends by the time Catherine and Henry had married. Catherine soon found a special place in her heart for the younger 2 children as well, Elizabeth, who was 10, and Edward, who was 6 when she became queen. In a sweet exchange of letters between Catherine and Edward, Catherine praises Edward's intellect and says how grateful she is that he loves her. And in his reply, he calls her his beloved mother and thanks her for all of the comfort and encouragement she provides him. Elizabeth was also very fond of her stepmother. She even spent hours embroidering a beautiful book cover for a display copy of Catherine's second published book, The Lamentation of a Sinner. Catherine was in a good place. The king doted on her and trusted her in equal measure. Henry respected her relationship with his children and her kindness towards him. When he went away on military campaigns to France, it was Catherine who was named regent. However, this brief period of power may have gone to Catherine's head. When the king returned, she was suddenly much more outspoken about her opinions, from religious reform to the ruling of the realm. She'd also begun openly associating with a radical Protestant preacher named Anne Askew, and members of the court were starting to take notice. Bishop Stephen Gardiner, a well-known conservative, was concerned that Catherine was becoming too radical. Although Henry was the head of the Church of England, his views were still mostly aligned with Catholicism. While he enjoyed a little religious debate from time to time, Catherine's preaching was starting to get on his nerves. In 1546, Henry confided in Bishop Gardiner that he was sick and tired of Catherine trying to change his mind, that a woman's place was to obey and not challenge her husband and king on matters of religion, especially a religion that he was the head of. It was here that Gardiner saw his opportunity, and soon he launched a plot against Catherine's life. Gardiner had recently arrested Anne Askew for heretical teachings. He somehow convinced King Henry to let him arrest and interrogate Catherine for associating with a known heretic. Catherine caught wind of the plan to have her arrested, and she found herself in a state of absolute panic. For some reason, when Henry heard the state his wife was in, he softened. He visited her and spoke with her himself. When he tried to talk to her about matters of religion, she declined to argue, saying that she was only a silly woman and that Henry should be teaching her and not the other way around. Although this move was wise on Catherine's part, it effectively silenced her as queen for the rest of her reign. From this point on, her political influence was gone, and her relationship with Henry was never the same. When Henry VIII died just a few months later, he had already changed his will to exclude Catherine from ever serving as regent for Edward. But she was not cut out of his will entirely. Catherine had loved Henry's children and mended a once broken relationship with his daughter, Mary. She was given a home called Chelsea Manor and was allowed to keep the Queen's jewels and wardrobe. She was also always to be referred to as Catherine, the Queen of England. She was now in a position coveted by nearly all Tudor women, that of a wealthy widow. Katherine retired to her home in Chelsea, and her stepdaughter Elizabeth came with her. While Katherine was supposed to be officially mourning the King of England's death, she was now engaged in a more dangerous game. She was secretly back with her old love, Thomas Seymour. They knew a marriage wouldn't be simple, since Edward VI Regency Council wouldn't approve of her getting married again so soon. So, they made the reckless decision to marry in secret. When news reached the court, everyone was shocked. And worst of all, Edward and Mary were deeply hurt by Katherine moving on so quickly after the death of their father. Elizabeth, who was now 14 years old, was a little more sympathetic to the situation, and she continued living with her stepmother. For a few months, the couple kept mostly to themselves, staying at their manor houses in Chelsea and Hanworth. Katherine was besotted with her new husband, and the two were happy together for a while. Katherine's husband was not the upstanding man that she believed him to be. He was a schemer and, unfortunately, an abuser. It seems that at one time or another, Elizabeth had had something of a childhood crush on Sir Thomas Seymour, and he was eager to take advantage of it. He began to flirt with the teenaged Elizabeth, hinting that maybe one day they could even be married. Sir Thomas would sneak into Elizabeth's bedroom early in the morning before she was dressed. Sometimes he would even get into bed with her, barely dressed himself. Their relationship grew so inappropriate that Elizabeth's governess thought Katherine needed to know. She tried to make light of the relationship, bizarrely deciding to join in to the horseplay, trying to make it seem like it was all a joke. We have no idea why Katherine did this, whether she was trying to protect Elizabeth by being there, or she was trying to protect her husband's reputation by pretending it was all in good fun. Katherine did have the good sense to send Elizabeth away in 1548, and we do have a surviving letter from Elizabeth saying her genuine thanks to Katherine. It would become clear to history that Thomas Seymour was an extremely ambitious man who was definitely interested in Elizabeth. But for Katherine, he was the first man that she had chosen to love, and she just couldn't accept that Thomas wanted someone else. In 1547, Katherine became pregnant. A huge surprise, but one that she was thrilled about. Her entire pregnancy leading up to the summer of 1548 was joyous for Katherine. She was at the newly renovated Sudley Castle with Jane Grey and her husband Thomas by her side, awaiting the birth of her first child. When she went into labor in late August, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Mary. Unfortunately, she began to feel ill almost immediately. On September 5th, 1548, Katherine Parr tragically died. Thomas Seymour, after inheriting all of Katherine's wealth, would attempt to marry Princess Elizabeth. And when that failed, he would, shockingly, be arrested outside of King Edward's apartment, attempting to break in with a loaded pistol. He would be executed for treason only months later. Katherine Parr's story is a very human one. She's not this mythical figure that always knows exactly what to do. Her life was full of hard decisions that she was proud of. Becoming the first female author in England, becoming wealthy and influential, surviving King Henry and reuniting him with his family, and other decisions that stung with regret. Ultimately, it should be known that Katherine was an intelligent and kind woman who tried her best and will always be known as the queen who survived. So, what did Katherine Parr really look like? We only have a few portraits of Katherine surviving for us today. Almost every portrait of Katherine has been misidentified at some point in its history, either as Mary I, Lady Jane Grey, or others. It's an interesting pattern which I think contributes to the reputation of Katherine being Henry's forgotten queen. The portraits we have that were made from life are this one, painted around 1547, and this one, painted around 1545. Both are attributed to the artist Master John. The way portraits of Katherine were finally identified is through jewelry. She's wearing this specific crown-shaped jewel on her chest, which was able to be matched with records of her possessions. Katherine was an attractive woman. She had dark blonde or reddish hair, piercing gray eyes, and a beautiful fair complexion. Her tall, thin frame was always flattered by the most luxurious clothing and jewelry. Also contributing to her beauty was her personality. She was lively, smart, and funny. I really love the 1547 portrait of Catherine. It just looks so much more lifelike to me than other Tudor portraits. She has these captivating cat-like eyes and just an elegance about her. This is also the portrait I've used for the recreation. So let's see Queen Katherine Parr brought to life now.